Meanwhile, NATO's chief Jens Stoltenberg has said that the military alliance is deploying its rapid response force for the first time ever since the beginning of this conflict. And this is to try and bolster the defense in the face of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Stoltenberg has warned that Kremlin's aggression has created a new normal in Eastern Europe.
We see, of course, that they're moving towards Kiev. We also see the rhetoric, the messages, which is strongly indicating that the aim is to change government, to change and remove the democratically elected government in Kiev. We are in close contact with the government of Ukraine. We are, of course, monitoring the situation very closely. It is still a fluid situation. What we have seen is that the Ukrainian forces are fighting bravely. Yesterday, NATO allies activated our defense plans. And as a result, we are deploying elements of the NATO response force on land, at sea, and in the air to further strengthen our posture and to respond quickly to any contingency.
The latest step by NATO, of course, aims at beefing up defences. Allies spearheaded by the United States have also rushed thousands of troops. Stoltenberg did not give any details on where the response forces will be sent. The NATO's response force, or the NRF, was, remember, created in 2003. It is made up of about 40,000 personnel and it includes 8,000 strong high readiness contingent with air, sea and special operations soldiers that can be deployed within days. Now, the Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby has also pointed out that the NRF is to protect NATO nations and not to engage in fighting in Ukraine, which is not a member of the NATO's military alliance. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what NATO's strategy has been over the conflict in Ukraine, we're joined in by Mr. Jason Beardsley, who is the National Executive Director Association of the U.S. Navy. He's joining us live from Arlington in Virginia, United States. Now, Mr. Beardsley, thank you very much indeed for taking time out and speaking to us here on WION. What do you make of this strategy by NATO, where it is deploying its rapid response team in NATO member nations in Eastern Europe? Is that likely to have any kind of an impact on what Russia is doing inside of Ukraine?
It's a good question. This is a reasonable strategy for where NATO is. They have said they will not intervene in Ukraine with ground troops. So the best thing they can do, or next best thing, is to make sure they're showing a posture of unity and strength. But let's not make any mistakes about it. Having them in neighboring countries is kind of like calling the fire brigade or the fire department into a neighborhood to occupy any house but the one that's burning. The on-the-ground effect will not have a big resonance, and Vladimir Putin's plan doesn't have much to do with the NATO countries. So it's a show of force. It's a great sign. It's not going to have a big impact.
And also, do you think in terms of what is unfolding in Ukraine, the West at this point of time has virtually lost a lot of leverage that it could have had if it had acted before, with the Russian forces threatening the capital city of Kiev and having encircled it? Has the West lost its initiative now?
Yeah, in fact, in warfare, momentum and initiative are very key principles of combat and winning and seizing the moment. You're absolutely right. The United States and the West at large has lost that momentum. We ceded that over the last 10 years, 2014 in particular. But the ability to interdict or bring to the Ukrainians lethal munitions on the ground would have made what Putin's doing in the last few days extremely difficult. You can see the effect when Ukrainians shoot down aircraft that are Russian or can stop tanks. That makes a huge dent in what Putin's plans are. We lost that opportunity. It's difficult to do that now and recover.
Absolutely, indeed. Do stay on with this, because I want you to weigh in terms of what the West is, of course, trying to do in trying to politically isolate Russia. The West, of course, is ramping up its pressure on Russia over its military action in Ukraine. And at the UNSC, as it was expected, Moscow has used its veto power to reject a UN Security Council draft resolution that sought to condemn the Russian invasion. It was no surprise at all that Russia vetoed the UN resolution that deplored in strongest terms Russia's invasion into Ukraine. Now, in terms of the division of votes, 11 of the Council's 15 members voted in favor of the motion, which was co-written by the United States and Albania. Now, interestingly, 3 nations chose to abstain from voting: China, India and the United Arab Emirates.
Проголосовала против представленного нам сегодня антироссийского и антиукраинского проекта резолюции Совета Безопасности. Почему антироссийского, думаю, объяснять не надо. Достаточно хотя бы бегло на него взглянуть. Почему антиукраинского? Потому что этот документ, вне всякого сомнения, противоречит коренным интересам украинского народа, поскольку пытается спасти и закрепить на Украине ту систему власти, которая подвела эту страну к трагедии, длящейся вот уже как минимум 8 лет.
Russia, which currently holds the rotating Security Council presidency, will likely face another vote on a similar resolution at the UNGA. The draft resolution is expected to be taken up by the 193-member UNGA in the next few days. And China's abstention, of course, comes just weeks after Beijing and Moscow declared a no-limits partnership backing each other over the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and also in Taiwan. The crucial vote, of course, comes at a time when the Russian forces are steadily advancing towards the Ukrainian capital of Kiev to topple the Volodymyr Zelensky government. Following the vote, the American ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, slammed Russia's decision to veto the resolution. She said that Russia can reject UNSC's decisions but cannot suppress its voice. The United States, meanwhile, has said that it will be imposing sanctions on the Russian President Vladimir Putin and also the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And this came after the US President Joe Biden held a phone call with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen over the latest developments in Ukraine. Mr. Beardsley, if I can bring you in on this. Now, this was a resolution that the United States was pushing forth at the UNSC. Russia, as expected, has vetoed it. 3 nations, interestingly, China, India and the United Arab Emirates, have chosen to abstain from the voting. There is an attempt to try and isolate Russia on the international stage. Do you think the West can actually succeed, considering that it has some pretty stout allies such as China?
Not effectively. We've watched that from the beginning of this, the sort of conflict, and the White House has admitted to this, that they were unlikely to affect or stop an intervention by Russia or an invasion. They mentioned that over and over again. So being able to get NATO members on board, that's critical. Obviously, Russia had the vote and vetoed it, and then we had the 3 abstentions. It's very difficult to have a coalition of that size agree on very difficult things. This proves, again, one of the great points here for the Ukrainians is you have to be prepared when you're sitting on the doorstep of a hungry empire, the Russian bear or the Chinese dragon, that if you're waiting for the international body to secure your land, that's not going to cut it. But if you have spirited people and stoke the embers of liberty, the freedom, and the tools to do that, that's lethal munitions, it's food, it's aid, it's communications, it's political governance, all those things can back off an empire. And what we're seeing right now on the ground in Ukraine are just those things. The spirited Ukrainians are putting up a fight, and they're dragging Putin into a further developing case than I think what Putin expected. So look for this to isolate him, not by just the West and the coalitions of NATO, but the combination of the violence on the ground that's stalling out, plus the isolation, that will help him.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
By help him, I mean help him back off.
Absolutely indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jason Beardsley, for joining us and sharing all those insights with us.
You bet. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.